Good evening, everyone. It is Monday, August the 12th, 2019. It is currently 7:23 p.m. Central Time, and this is a live broadcast for the VBC 66 app. Now, this will be recorded and this will be posted all over the internet. I hate to always have to do this, but I have to at least offer an explanation. This is a live broadcast for the VBC 66 app. So if you hear a recording of this and you would like to be able to listen to the broadcast when they're actually live and have access to everything else that we post, please go to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store and do a search for VBC 66. VBC stands for Victory Baptist Church. The number 66 stands for the number of books in the Bible. VBC 66. Please get the app. Hopefully you'll find, I know. There's plenty of content added to the app on a daily basis to give you something to think about, to give you spiritual food, keep you informed. So I know you'll find something useful, and hopefully then you'll find it so useful you'll share it with other people, and then everyone can benefit from it. Now, it is a live broadcast. These live broadcasts are primarily designed for the people who use the app, and in a sense that I send out a notification, and it's kind of my way of saying, hey, those who use the app, I'm going to go live. I've got some things I want to talk about. And so a lot of times I will do kind of my own devotional time, and that's what I wanted to do tonight. I wanted to do my evening devotional time live, but I cannot do that. And here's the reason why. Last night at Victory Baptist Church, I was unable to record the message because I forgot to bring the iPad to church, and we record all of our sermons at our church via an iPad. So, I have to kind of discuss what we talked about last night, because I think what we talked about last night at Victory Baptist Church is extremely important, and I think it's very unique. I don't think most Christians who've been attending church for any length of time probably approaches the text of Scripture we looked at in the same way. I offered a very, I guess what some may say, a controversial approach to a chapter in the Bible, and so I want to set this up by, I guess I feel it's important enough to dedicate really an entire week on the VBC 66 app about this section of Scripture and really try to challenge people to look at it. And I know it's going to be somewhat controversial, and I'm kind of hesitant. I even trying to talk about it, I'm a little hesitant because I know whenever you come to a passage of Scripture and you look at it in a way that most Christians do not, then you're going to find yourself in the middle of, a controversy and disagreement. Now, sometimes that controversy and disagreement can be handled in a very godly way, and everyone benefits from it, or sometimes people just attack, and I don't really want it to turn into that. But I do hope it will give people pause to go, wow, that's definitely a different way to approach Scripture. And I think I'll begin, before we get to the Scripture, I think we'll begin this way. When it comes to the Bible, people read the Bible, right? And I'm often amazed at how I guess I'm often amazed or perplexed by how Christians read the Scriptures. They read them with, they're like, this is the way they read it. They read the Bible and they're like, okay, I heard a sermon once that way. And it's like they don't read to really interpret it. They just read it because they're supposed to read it. And their way of reading is just, it seems to violate all the basic rules of reading interpretation. It just seems like they read it, it's filled with presuppositions, it's filled with, well, that's the way I've always heard it taught. And instead of just like, okay, I'm really digging into this text, I'm really trying to understand it, I'm really trying to be respectful to the text, to interpret it correctly, using basic rules of sound interpretation, basic rules of hermeneutics. Most Christians don't do that. And so when you come along and you challenge the way a text has been read for, it seems, a very long time within Christianity, people always will push back and say, that cannot be the case. And I sometimes want to say, well, how do you know it can't be the case? Because most of the time people have not actually read it in a careful manner. And that bothers me. I don't know how to change the way people read the Bible. I think there needs to be a change. And I think people need to realize, look, when you open that Bible and you start reading, you really need to think carefully about what you're reading and lay aside all the presuppositions, lay aside all the previous teachings, and really try to find the truth. And that's what I'm going to do. So here is the situation. Now, I want to teach what I did last night at church. I really do. It's so frustrating because I think the way it was taught last night, if everyone could hear that, I think they would benefit greatly from it. And for this reason, the way we worked through the text as a corporate body, as a group of believers, I think everyone hearing that would benefit greatly from it. So I don't know I can't recreate it here in a room by myself. I cannot really recreate it that way. But what I can do is at least set everything up, get everyone kind of knowing the issue, and then start pointing you to what we're going to be doing and try to come up with a plan. Does that make sense? All right. The text of Scripture, and if you saw the title, you already know, is Luke chapter 12. Is Luke chapter 12. Now I'm going to set the iPad here on a stand. Luke chapter 12. And, there's a lot here I could say. But, I don't even know how I want to do this. Because the way I handled it at church last night is I didn't let the people know where we were going. What I did was say, okay, here's Luke chapter 12, and we just started working in Luke 12, and I did not really say, hey, here's the scriptures in question. I wanted to build to it. So I guess here's what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to challenge everyone to do. Read Luke chapter 12, verses 1. Where do I want you to stop? Verses 1 to 48. 1 to 48. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48, and I want you to read that 5 times. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48. Now, this is important. I cannot stress the importance of this. I'm going to be trying to lead us to maybe a different way of approaching Luke chapter 12, which I think could challenge how we approach lots of scripture. And a lot of times people will immediately try to push back or fight, but they push back and fight before they actually do the work. So this is an absolute requirement. Before we can discuss this, before we can have any agreement or disagreement, everyone needs to read Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48 5 times. All right? Because then that will give you a very clear understanding of the structure of Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48. It will help you kind of start seeing how some things fit together, and that will be critical in trying to get a correct understanding of the section. All right? As you go from Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48, what I want you to look for is trying to outline chapter 12, verses 1 through 48. Try to come up with a good outline. And I can help you a little bit, all right? Luke chapter 12, I think if you look at this carefully, you can find from verse 1 to 12, and we did this last night at Victory Baptist Church, and we may do it again. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12, I think makes up the first section. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12, I think makes up the first section. And the reason I say this, if you start in chapter 12, verse 1, in the meantime, when they were gathered together an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they trode one upon another, he began to say unto his disciples, first of all. Jesus starts talking to his disciples. We have a setting in verse 1. The setting is there's an innumerable number of people, a large crowd, and Jesus turns and starts speaking to his disciples. And he speaks to them at the end of verse 1 all the way to verse 12. All right? There's a teaching there. Then in verse 13, and one of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me. All right. So verse 12, we have a major change. I don't think there's any debate there. So chapter 12, verses 1 through 12 is section number 1. Section number 2, and one of the company said unto him, section number 2 starts with, and one of the company said unto him. That's verse 13. And it goes all the way down to verse 21. And the reason we say it stops in verse 21 is because in 22, and he said unto his disciples, he changes his focus. He goes from answering, he goes from, this conversation started up by one of the company who wants him to tell his brother to divide his inheritance. He uses that to launch into a teaching. And then in verse 22, he said unto his disciples, he turns back to his disciples who he started talking to originally in verse 1. So verse 13 to 21 is almost like an interruption to his overall teaching, right? Because someone asked him to do something, and then he responds to that, and his response launches into a teaching. Verse 22, he turns back to his disciples, all right? And I'm going to argue that teaching goes all the way... Where to stop this section, we had some discussion about this last night. I think we could say we will stop this section in verse 31. We'll stop this section in verse 31. So section 1, chapter 12, verse 1 to 12. Section 2, chapter 12, verse 13 to 21. Section 3, chapter 12, verse 22 to verse 31. Then we have verse 32 to 34. We're going to make it its own section. All right? I think that's what we're going to do. All right? So let's break this down again. Luke chapter 12. If I said Romans, I apologize. Luke chapter 12. We're working on Romans on Sunday morning, so Romans is on my mind. Luke chapter 12. We're going to break this section down, all right? And again, the first thing you need to do is read Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 48, 5 times. And then you need to work on an outline, and I'm giving you what I think is a good way to break this down. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12 is section number 1. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21 is section number 2. Luke chapter 12, verse 22 to 31 is the next section. All right, so we got section 1, section 2. Oh, I'm sorry, I messed that up. Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12 is section number 1. Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21 is section number 2. Section number 3 is Luke chapter 12, verse 22 to 31. And then I guess that would be how many? Let's count them. 1, 2, 3. And then the fourth section would be Luke chapter 12, verse 31 to 34. All right? Those are the sections I want you to have down. Now, I'm not giving you a title for those sections. I'm not offering you any interpretation in those sections. But that is what I want you to do. I want you to start seeing that structure. All right? Now, what you need to do is you go look at those sections, right? For example, Luke chapter 12, verses 1 through 12. And you look at that section like, okay, what should I call this section of my outline? We can't just call it section 1. What do we call it? We want to call it something that summarizes the content of Luke 12, verses 1 through 12. You want something that summarizes the content of that section. Then you go to section number 2, Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. What are we going to call that? We can't just call it section 2. We need a title that summarizes the content of that section. You really want to capture the essence of that section. What is it really about? Then You go to section number 3, Luke chapter 12, verses 22 to 31. What is that section about? Then section number 4,